Okay, so today I'm reviewing the Abasi Concepts Larada Master Series 8. Now, I've reviewed this guitar before, about over a year ago, and I figure as I've recorded more music with this, as I've performed with this, as I've owned it for about like 2 years or so now, I figured I'd give you guys an update. How has it held up over the years? What maintenance have I had to do to this instrument? And finally, how would I review it now that I've had it for few years now? I'm going to talk about these things and give you a full mix demo at the end so you can hear how it sounds.
And by the way, this is unsponsored.
Okay, let's jump right in. So for general maintenance and setup, I've had to adjust the truss rod over the years a few times, you know, as the temperatures change as the years go by. I've also had to adjust the intonation too. Now, it wasn't really painful at all. It's hard to see, but there's these little like hex screw holes in there that you can just tighten and it moves back and forth. You don't need to loosen the string at all. So that's really convenient. I do string changes about every like 6 months and I use lemon oil on the fretboard. There's been no problems, no cracks or anything like that. I use 10s on it, elixir 10s. I just get them from Guitar Center, so I haven't memorized like what the gauges are. You can just go to Guitar Center and pick them up. It's also one of the few strings they have there for 8 strings, so I guess that's lucky too. And my tuning is a whole step down, by the way, so that's why I'm using 10s. I do prefer, like in standard tuning, 9s, so this has the same kind of feel. Alright, some more miscellaneous things about this guitar. So I usually put my pick into the strings when I don't have my guitar, like when I'm not playing it. But with this, you can't really put the pick into the 8 strings because it always flies out. Whenever I touch the strings, the first thing it does, or even just put it down, the first thing it does is just pop out. So I gotta like put the pick into like the 6th string or like any of the other ones, then it stays a little bit better. But that's just like a kind of little annoyance. I also had to adjust my strap just a little bit higher. Like I like my guitar strap a bit on the lower side, just a little bit. But I've raised it a bit, and that's made this guitar so much more playable. For obvious reasons, like this is clearly a thumb behind the neck kind of guitar. Also, the battery charging port is hopeless. Here it is. Now this charging port is not part of the pick guard, it's just kind of stuck on there. Whenever I like plug in the cable to charge it, it's just the first thing that happens. You apply just a little bit of pressure, then it becomes unstuck. And then you've got to either take off the thing and like adjust it and then charge it like that, or you just make sure the plug is against the other side of the cavity and then you put the plug in, and then to re-stick it when you're done charging, you just pull it back out and then it sticks itself back. So it's really, I really just gotta super glue it or something. That's a pretty big mess. Alright, so let's talk about playability now. Now the playability on this guitar is excellent, fantastic. 10 out of 10, which is what you would expect at this price point. So no surprises there. The neck profile is fantastic. It's my favorite kind of neck profile, like a kind of thin C shape. Of course it's wider because it's an 8 string, but in general it's like a kind of not flat D kind of thing, but like a rounded thing. So if you get the Legion series of the Abasi Concepts guitars, those have more like the flat D kind of neck. So this is a different profile than that, and I do prefer this. But if you prefer more like flat neck, you might prefer the Legion more. As you can see and hear, in the cutaway, the neck profile is different. You can see it kind of curves in, so at the bass side it's thicker, and then at the treble side it continues the C shape. So it's okay, I don't hate it. Obviously the bends, you just gotta perfect thumb behind the neck bends. That can feel a bit weird, so don't mess up the technique on that. I mean, it is what it is. So obviously if you prefer the thumb over the neck style, this isn't gonna work. But one nice thing is because it is like the 8 string, like it has a wider neck, this actually isn't too bad for this kind of thing. So it works better than you think, but it's never gonna feel like thumb over the neck. And also in terms of the cutaway, it's nice that there isn't like a huge lower horn. But if you are playing like up on the neck right here and your hand is like this, then it does hit the lower horn. If you have it more like angled like that, then obviously it won't. A nice thing though is that there is this kind of cutaway right here, so it's not as intrusive as if it wasn't. Okay, so we've talked about playability in terms of hitting notes and stuff, but how do you feel when you're playing it? You know, now that the initial, like having it and it's new has long worn off, I can kind of give you some insights there. So this guitar is very lightweight. It's not heavy at all. I have a Solar T1.7 and that thing is a brick. That's like 11 pounds. In comparison, this is lighter than most of my 7 strings too. So it's lightweight, but it's also compact too. You can see how far the bridge is on the body, and the neck is like deeply set in to the guitar. So it's really not sticking out that much farther. Like I've got 7 strings back to the T1.7, which I love so much. It feels great to play, but the neck does stick out like really, really far. So the neck doesn't stick out like as much as you might think it would. Like other 8 strings stick out way farther. So you're less likely to hit your bassist with it by mistake. Of course, it has like these super deep bevels, so your forearm just fits right onto it. It's really nice. And it also has this kind of cutaway down here on the bottom, so it does fit really nice if you're sitting classical style too. Feels pretty amazing. And you can play it in the standard style sitting down. And when you're standing up, it's how it is. Also, the output jack is in this really cool location. It's like up here, so the plug goes in like this. So you don't have to worry about wrapping the cable around the strap button, which is over here, because it's facing upward. So if you accidentally step on your cable, it's not pulling it in a way that's gonna pull out the cable. So that's pretty cool. It's also out of the way too, no matter how you sit with it or stand with it. And so then going back to how like it feels emotionally to play, it is so much fun to play on the higher strings, and then you just hit that low string. Such a contrast in sounds, whether you're playing with distortion or you're playing clean. And yes, you can get that absurd riffing down low, playing in octaves that most guitars never even touch or dream of. Like what the heck? You can play like a standard E riff, and then you can think like, oh, I wonder what it's gonna sound like an octave lower, then you just do it. So yeah, you can do all the modern metal stuff and such like that too. Or you can play just regular and see how it sounds down low, or you can play in different octaves. The world is your oyster. It's also pretty amusing to hear how palm muting sounds down on those lower strings. You can get it to work. It's not the most musical sometimes, but you can get it to work. And of course, you've got lots of tones available. You've got the 5-way switch and all that. So you can get those split coil sounds. You can have the humbucker sound. So it's probably going to sound good through your setup, whether it's a pedal board, whether you're using a multi-effects thing, whether you've got some plugins, or like you've got like an amplifier and stuff. So it's just a blast to play, unless you hate multiscales or hate 8 strings. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but right now let's talk about the playing feel and like how the materials feel. So the stainless steel frets feel amazing. They're nice and smooth. They've stood the test of time. Very durable and very nice. I'm personally a fan of how they feel. If you like kind of the nickel silver, of course it's gonna feel different, obviously, but this is that steel feel you expect. The roasted maple neck also feels good too. There's no finish on the back of the neck or the front of the neck, so it's nice and smooth, nice and quick. You're not gonna get caught up on anything, which is nice because your brain is going to be busy trying to wrap itself around the 8 strings. The volume knob turns nice and smooth. There's no problems there. The push-pull is nice. The knob stays on. And the switch hasn't broken. It feels nice. I was a bit worried about it because when you switch it, it's a little bit janky between the first and second positions. Like you really got to push it all the way to get into that bridge pickup. So I was really worried about it at first, like, is this gonna fail eventually down the line? But so far it's held up and it hasn't failed yet. There's been no cutout in volume in any of the pickups. I've had that problem with a few other guitars, but I haven't had that problem with this. And so when you're playing this guitar and you're having fun, it can feel really good just to hit that string hard and get that pitch drift, and it sounds amazing. But the thing with these saddles, these individual saddles, is that the string can pop out of each one fairly easily if you hit it too hard. And since I'm kind of more on the lower tension of things, you know, I've got 10s, but I'm a whole step down. That could be a problem if I played really, really hard. So that's something to keep in mind. If you do play hard and you do have lighter strings, that can be an issue because these strings can hop out of the saddle. All right, so let's talk about availability. You know, let's say that you do want this guitar and you want to play it and have it and you want it in a specific color. Well, the thing about these is they release them in limited drops at like, I don't know, 2 p.m. on a Sunday Pacific time, whenever they do it. And the thing is, they only have a few of each color, only a few models offered. So they'll have either the 8 string, or they'll have the 7 string, or they'll have the other model, the Emmy, which is the double cut. And these guitars just sell out so quick. I was really lucky to be able to get this one. The website takes like 1 or 2 minutes to update, and once it does, the guitars sell out in seconds. So you really just gotta click, you gotta have all your info saved, and then bam, you gotta move quickly or else they'll sell out. So if you wanted like a blue one with an ebony fretboard, you gotta be quick or else that's gonna sell out. Then you're gonna have to pivot and maybe get the one with a maple one. Of course, there are scalpers online. You know, there are people who have bought them. Maybe they don't love it completely, so they just kind of list it for a little bit higher of a price just to see if anyone's gonna buy it. But there are 1 or 2 people out there who are selling these for way too much money, like $7,000, $10,000. It's like, come on, dude. But hey, let's say you do manage to get one of these. Let's talk about how it sounds. How are you going to use this thing? Well, whether it's playing live or recording, the pickups sound good. These sound great. They're active pickups, but they've got like some nice mid-range, so they're not like harsh for metal only. They're actually pretty usable for other applications. They do come with like a second voice that's billed as a like passive kind of voice, but I've never used it for anything. The difference between the two is so minuscule. There's like certain times where you can kind of hear the difference, but for this it's not. Doesn't matter. To my ears, the active setting, so the knob in, fits better in my mixes. So that's like a subjective thing. Maybe you'll like the voice 2 better. But for me, I've never had to use that other tone. The split coil sounds sound good. They sound like you think they'd sound. They're pretty usable. They work well with effects, plugins, real amps. It sounds good. So for these sounds, let's talk about how it works with recording. I primarily do a whole bunch of recording, obviously for YouTube and stuff, making my own music. The number of strings and the multiscale is a blessing and a curse. So the multiscale is nice because you get the tension down low and it's easier to play up top for your solos and stuff. But because these are very high output active pickups and there's more strings to deal with, your muting technique has to actually be really, really good, or else you're going to be picking up noise from these strings while you're playing on these strings. Or if you're trying to do like the low down stuff, then these strings can actually ring out if you're not muting them correctly. On top of that, there's a really big difference between like the amplitude and the waveform of how these higher strings vibrate versus how these lower strings vibrate. So if you're setting up like your preamp on your audio interface and you're setting it up so that you get some nice volume and stuff for the higher strings, then when you go down to your lower strings, they're going to be clipping. You almost have to plan out like which parts you record. Like maybe you record the stuff on the higher strings first and then you go to the lower stuff. Maybe you've got like a compressor or something before your input. I don't know. You just got to watch out for that. Of course, you get pitch drift if you hit the lower strings too hard, especially on an 8th string. The 8th string is really ridiculous to control if you're not careful. And also in terms of muting and technique, because it's the multi-scale, you just have to adjust where you're doing your palm mutes and stuff. All right, so also for recording, let's talk about the tuning, because obviously you're going to have to tune it up, whether you're recording like maybe after every take, maybe it lasts a long time. Let's talk about it. So the tuning stability is pretty, I'd say average to good. It's not amazing. You do have to tune every now and then, but it's not poor. Like you don't have to tune too much. I'd say it's pretty reasonable. But when you're tuning, you have to use these tuning heads. And oh my god, I kind of hate them. They're like this round kind of thing, like they're cylinders. So like the normal tuning heads, you can like kind of turn it a bit. They've got little protrusions on either side. But this, they're just completely round. So you got to grab them and tune them a bit. It's difficult to turn them precisely. So you're trying to tune it and then you accidentally do it too far. And then your like hand is cramping and it doesn't feel good because it's just a freaking cylinder. I'm not a fan, but there's not really too much room to put the standard tuning heads or whatever. So it is what it is. And also the lowest string can confuse a lot of tuners. You know, usually guitar tuners, they're expecting 6 strings, maybe a low 7th. But this low E string, because I have it down a whole step, usually I just tune it by ear. Alright, so how do I use this guitar? I don't really use the low strings too much unless the song calls for it. Naturally, on the songs that do need it, I'm gonna use this guitar. So if you go through my music and you see this guitar and I'm using the low strings, it's like, yeah, of course, because it has the low strings. But you can play up here, and I do use it like up here, you know, around the middle strings and stuff like that. It sounds really, really good. I've experimented with the split coil sounds. You know, I've tried how it sounds with, you know, like in modern metal, they've got like the position 2 kind of bridge split and they're riffing on that. So I've tried that a few times. It's fun. I've tried doubling the bass with that, like what the bass is playing. That sounds like pretty good, pretty interesting. In general, though, I don't really play modern metal and like the gent kind of fall stuff, not really. So it's possible to do it on this guitar, but I'm using it more as kind of an all-purpose thing. I've played metal on this. I've played more like ambient background kind of stuff. Ambient, it's not that ambient, but like more clean kind of stuff, I mean to say. And so while you do have these lower strings, sometimes things will sound better played higher up. Like it's important not to just get tunnel vision on just because you have the 8th string. You have to use it every time in every song. Some songs you only use like 5 of the strings or 6 of the strings, and they're the more treble ones. And that's perfectly okay, because with this guitar there's a lot of possibilities, but you don't have to do everything all the time. Like if you know how to do the 2-hand tapping, or even just the standard like Eddie Van Halen tapping, you don't have to use that in every single song you do. Well, same thing with the strings. You don't have to use every single string in every single song. So this is an 8-string guitar, and if you're playing stuff on the first 6 strings, it's always going to be more comfortable to play it on a 6-string guitar. So if you're planning on playing mostly 6-string stuff, and you have like many songs, like 90% of songs don't even use the 7th or 8th string, you might want to consider just playing a 6th string and then maybe pitch shifting down. You know, the 6-string guitars, they don't have all this neck. It's a thinner instrument. It's easier to wrap your hand around. It's less strings to look at if you get lost and you're looking down at your fretboard trying to find your place, it's just that much easier to find out where you are on a 6th string. The wider neck also means it's a different kind of neck profile to make it playable. So like a 6th string, you could have like a nice thick neck and you can like wrap your hand around it, things like that. But on more extended range instruments like 7 strings and 8 strings, obviously it's a wider neck. In order to make it more playable, it tends to be a bit more thin. I'm sure there are some people out there who do prefer like a wider kind of thin extended range neck, and good for you. You know, these instruments exist, they're out there, obviously they're playable. I like them every now and then. I use them in songs, they're pretty useful. They're not horrible to play. And you know, if you do have songs that have lower down stuff and still higher up stuff, it is nice being able to play on one guitar, because live you're not switching around guitars, because that can be troublesome. When you're recording, you don't have to switch guitars and change your settings too much, although like I mentioned earlier, watch out about the preamp, those levels and stuff like that with the clipping. But moving back to the Multiscale that helps make this all possible, it is very useful, and on paper it seems like the obvious choice for guitars like this especially. I've done a video talking about the pros and cons of Multiscale guitars, so if you want to get more detail about that, you can go ahead and check that out. But basically, to summarize, because you have this bridge that pretty much is going away from you, you need to change your technique, your playing technique. So like where you're picking, where you're palm muting, because it curves away, you gotta follow that, your muting technique, etc., etc., your pinch harmonics, because that position changes as the string scale changes, and your eyes have to get used to these frets curving away at this angle, at that angle, etc. When you're playing up on the higher frets, for example, and you look down, you actually can't really see which fret you're on unless you're really looking over the fretboard, because the frets are curving away like that. It's a lot to get used to. And when you're playing it too, you see the frets angle away like this, the angle in like that. It's not too hard to get used to playing it, but you always feel like you're kind of adjusting your playing and you're compensating for these slanting. So there's always going to feel like there's something different about this. It does feel like a different instrument than like a 6th string or even a 7th string. Overall, it's easier to play a uniform scale length guitar, but then you get into stuff like if it's the longer scale length, then the treble strings, like it's a bigger reach and those are going to start to sound more brittle. There's compromises either way. Alright, so let's bring it in. What's the verdict on this guitar? What do I think about it? Is this guitar worth it several years later? Well, I say yes. Yes, it is. If this is an instrument you're looking for, you're willing to play with these specs and these are what you want, then this is the ultimate guitar. It's playable, it's high quality, it sounds good, it looks unique. But like I said, you need to want the features that this has. So you need to want the Multiscale, or else you're going to absolutely hate the guitar. I would recommend trying out any Multiscale guitar before looking to buy one of these and seeing if you like it, like kind of getting a feel for it a little bit. You're probably going to be able to figure out within the first 5 minutes if this is something for you or not. But also keep in mind, like, you get the instrument, you're going to have to play the instrument and use the instrument. So is it going to be something you're going to want to keep on doing? So if it's even just a little annoying at first, that annoyance is going to compound over time. It's going to just feel worse and worse. Of course, with the Multiscale, you get a little bit more tension on the lower end, but it's not too much. It's not like a huge difference. So this isn't a substitute for something like an Evertune that holds the tuning in place. It's not going to be amazing like that. Of course, it also doesn't feel like an Evertune. So if you hate that spring fighting against you kind of feeling, then this would be the way to go. And then of course on the flip side, on the treble end, it's really nice having that 25.5 scale length. You can play things as expected and it feels nice. You don't have to really compensate your bends too much. Depending on what string you are, like it's just the same on this and it gets just a little different as you go down, but you get a feel for it really quick. Besides all that, it's a lightweight guitar, feels good to play, to be on your body, to sit with, no matter how you sit with guitars. It sounds pretty good, the tones are very usable, and it has a unique look that people either love or they hate. And of course, you have to want a guitar that, in some cases, forces you to play with your thumb behind the neck. If you're one of those players that always has their thumb up here or like up here, something like that, it's not going to work. So what are some alternatives to this guitar? You know, what if you want something different than this? Or what if you want this, but you can't get a hold of one because they're impossible to get? Well, more and more manufacturers are starting to make 8-string guitars. Some of them have multi-scale guitars. You know, there's ESP, the LTD. There's starting to be 8-string guitars there. Ibanez is making 8-string guitars. Lots of manufacturers are starting to introduce multi-scale. Like you've got solar guitars, you've got 8 strings, you've got multi-scale 7 strings, you've got baritone 6 strings. Other companies make baritone 6 strings too, which would be a great alternative if you don't want to have to handle 8 strings. You could just tune down with the baritone. But yes, lots of manufacturers are introducing multi-scales too. There's Ormsby that comes to mind. They've got like all those multi-scale guitars. They've got 6, 7, and 8 strings. They've got different body shapes too, so you could get like a flying V shape, a super strat. There's one, I think it's called the Goliath, that sort of kind of looks like this a little bit. There's a whole lot out there that you can get an alternative to this that might be more readily available. So overall, is this guitar right for you? Well, you have to want the multi-scale, you have to want that single cut, you have to want the 2 active pickups and the 5-way switch, and you have to be okay with not getting your first choice because of how quick they sell out when they do become available. But when you do get it, the possibilities are endless, and you can play any style your heart desires. Now, we're moving on to the full mix demo, but before that, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. You know, print out every frame, mail it to everyone you know. But yeah, let's check out how it sounds in a full mix, and as always, peace.